Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we start, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know what places and what times of day or night these written accounts get to. In the thick forests of the Ozark Mountains, where the mist clings to the old trees like ghostly fingers, there is a story that has been purposely left out of most history books. It was 1776. A year that saw a revolution and the founding of a new country. But while the eastern seaboard was at war, a different kind of darkness was growing in the wilds of what would later become Missouri and Arkansas. The first written record of the Pruitt family comes from land registration records in colonial Virginia. Nathaniel Pruitt was born in 1734 to English immigrants. He was known to be a good carpenter and farmer who didn't have a lot of money. The parish registry of a small church outside of Williamsburg recorded his marriage to Sarah Blackwood in 1756. Tax records show that they lived on a small farm for almost 20 years, during which time they had 5 children: Thomas in 1758, Elizabeth in 1760, Catherine in 1764, Samuel in 1770, and Rebecca, who was born in 1775. People still wonder why the family left their safe home to go to the dangerous frontier. A partial letter found in colonial government records suggests that Nathaniel was having trouble with money. He wrote to a cousin in early 1775, "The debts are getting too big for me to pay. I have heard tell of land in the Western Territories where a man might claim acreage sufficient to establish a legacy for his children." Another letter from November 1775 hints at another possible reason. Sarah hasn't been feeling well since Rebecca was born. The doctor says that a change of air might help her health. There are many records of the Pruitt family's trip west, no matter what their reasons were. In February 1776, a merchant's ledger from a trading post in Kentucky showed that they bought supplies. A military letter said they went through a ford on the border in March of the same year. By April 1776, they had made it to the western slopes of the Ozark Mountains. There, Nathaniel filed a land claim with a French colonial administrator for a 200-acre piece of land near what is now Jasper County. The official land claim, which is kept in territorial records, says that the property is a fertile valley with limestone bluffs to the north. It has a clear creek that provides plenty of water, a lot of timber, and a meadow that can be farmed. Nathaniel's signature on this document is very steady compared to his earlier signatures from Virginia records. This suggests that he was sure of his choice, even though settling on the frontier was dangerous. A missionary who passed by the Pruitt homestead wrote in his journal that he saw a family who had just moved from Virginia working hard on building a large house in June 1776. The missionary also noted that the family looked healthy and happy, especially Mrs. Pruitt, who seemed to be doing much better after being sick earlier. Nathaniel's letter to his cousin in Virginia from July 1776 confirmed this account of Sarah Pruitt's better health. Sarah thrives in the mountain air. Her sadness has gone away, and she works hard in the garden like she hasn't since before Rebecca was born. The kids are also doing well in this wild country. Thomas helps me improve our claim, and the girls have made a small schoolroom in a corner of the cabin where Elizabeth teaches her younger siblings their letters. The letter goes on to describe the land, which makes it seem like Nathaniel thought he had found the fresh start his family needed. The soil yields bountifully with little encouragement. We have planted corn and beans, squash and potatoes. The forest provides ample game, and the stream that passes near our door teems with fish. We want for nothing that honest labor cannot provide. These written accounts show that the Pruitt family's first months in the Ozarks were full of hope and new beginnings. This makes what happened next even more disturbing. A piece of what looks like Nathaniel's personal journal, which historian Arthur Fleming found in 1,952 inches, the collection of a private antiquities dealer in Philadelphia, is the first sign that something is wrong. The letter dated the 18th of September 1776 has a very different tone from his earlier letters. Thomas found a strange opening in the limestone bluff behind the house today. It looks like a natural cave entrance, but it's partly hidden by fallen rock. The boy wanted to go inside, but the darkness beyond the entrance made me uneasy. I told him he couldn't go in without me, even though I don't plan to explore the passage right away. Sarah says I'm being superstitious, but I can't shake the feeling that some things are best left alone. The next entry, dated September 30th, is the first time that something that would become a common theme in the Pruitt mystery is mentioned. The sound started 3 nights ago. It's a low, rhythmic pulsing that seems to come from the cave. Sarah and the younger kids can't hear it, but Thomas told me this morning that it's been keeping him awake. He said it sounds like a heartbeat, but not quite right. I told him it was just the wind moving through the rocks, but I don't believe that myself. The next preserved entry, which is from the 12th of October 1776, shows that things have gotten worse. Thomas's interest in the cave entrance is becoming worrisome. Twice this week I have found him standing in front of it at dawn, as if he had been there all night. When I asked him about it, he said he didn't remember getting out of bed. Yesterday I found marks scratched into the ground in front of the entrance, symbols I don't recognize, arranged in a circle. Thomas says he didn't make them, and they don't seem like the work of a boy. I have covered them with stones and told the children to stay away from the bluff completely. The journal entries from late October show that things were getting worse very quickly. Elizabeth now says she hears the sounds too. She describes them differently than Thomas' voices singing without words, she says. I have caught her watching her brother when she thinks no one is watching her. Something passes between them, some understanding I am not privy to. Sarah suggests it is just the natural bond of siblings, but I see something more troubling in their silent communications. On the 27th of October 1776, Catherine stood in front of the fire at midnight and stared at the flames without blinking. When I touched her shoulder, she turned to me with an expression I can only describe as hunger, though not for food. She spoke a sentence in a language unknown to me, her voice deeper than should be possible for a child of 12. When I pressed her about it in the morning, she had no recollection of the event. The 3rd of November 1776. The markings have come back, not just in front of the cave entrance, but also carved into the wood of our home, behind furniture, under rugs, and in the corners of rooms. I haven't seen anyone making these symbols, but they seem to be getting more and more every day. Sarah finally admits that something is wrong, but she thinks it's just a fever or frontier madness. I'm not sure that the explanation is so simple. The most disturbing entry, dated November 12th, says, "The sound has come back, louder than before." Sarah says it's just the wind in the rock formations, but I know better. It comes from below. The kids hear it too, but they don't talk about it anymore. Thomas watches the floor at night. I found him sleeping in the root cellar again this morning. He says he hears his name being called. Nathaniel wrote on November 20, a week later. Sarah found marks on the children this morning, like small burns on their shoulders and backs. She accuses me of discipline I did not administer. The marks form patterns I cannot comprehend. Elizabeth can now recite passages of scripture she has never been taught. When asked how she knows these words, she only smiles. Her teeth seem different somehow. The last entry in the journal, dated the 2nd of December 1776, says, I have found what lies beneath the root cellar. God forgive me for bringing my family to this place. They are in the walls now. They speak with borrowed tongues. I have failed to protect them from what was waiting here long before we arrived. The French trader comes in 5 days. Perhaps there is still time. This last entry fits with what we know from history, which shows that Jean-Baptiste Duval, a French fur trader, was in the area in early December. His story about what he saw at the Pruitt homestead is the first outside record of the event that would puzzle researchers for generations. The Missouri Historical Society has Duval's original ledger, but it was sealed off from the public until 1968. It had the following entry from the 7th of December, 1776. Arrived at the homestead of the Englishman Pruitt near midday. The cabin appeared in good order, with smoke rising from the chimney and no outward sign of distress. Upon approaching, however, I observed an unnatural stillness. No movement within or without. No sound of human activity or animal husbandry. The door stood partially open. Within, I discovered a scene unnatural in its perfection. as if the family had simply turned to vapor while going about their daily tasks. A meal laid upon the table, still warm, 5 places set, though the family numbered 7. Garments folded neatly upon chairs, the hearth fire burning low, but not extinguished. Most peculiar was the family Bible laid open upon the table, certain passages in the book of Judges marked with a substance that appeared to be blood. I shall not transcribe the verses here, for they disturb my thoughts even now, though they were familiar texts. I called for the family, searching the sleeping quarters and the surroundings of the cabin, but found no sign of recent human passage, no tracks in the soft earth save my own. Though a light snow had fallen the previous night, and should have preserved any evidence of departure, I confess I experienced a profound dread, unlike any I have known in 20 years of frontier travel. Though no threat presented itself, I felt observed from all directions, as if the very walls of the cabin held eyes. In the root cellar, I discovered. It looks like ink has been used to cover up some lines of text on purpose. I won't say anything more about what I found there. Some things are better left unrecorded so they don't get stuck in your dreams. I left quickly, traveling through the night despite the dangers, because I wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. I will report the disappearance to the colonial administrator at Fort Charlesworth, but I don't think anything will happen because the location is so far away and the military is busy right now. A December 10th entry in Duval's ledger shows that he did tell someone about what he found. The administrator sent 3 militiamen to look into the Pruitt homestead. I refused to go with them, even though they offered to pay me. No amount of money would make me go back to that valley. I gave them detailed directions and told them to be very careful, especially around the root cellar. I worry that my warnings were not taken seriously. Colonial records show that 3 militiamen, Corporal James Harlow, Private William Scherer, and Private Thomas Jenkins, were sent to look into the Pruitt homestead on the 12th of December, 1776. There is no official record of what they found in preserved records. A short note on the duty roster from the 20th of January, 1777, says, Harlow, Scherer, and Jenkins to be listed as deserted. Their accounts forfeit. This is not how the military usually did things at the time. Instead of listing men who didn't come back from an official mission as missing, they would have listed them as deserted. Claude Fontaine, the colonial administrator who had ordered the investigation, noticed this difference. During a 1964 archival project at Washington University, they found his personal letters, which included one to his boss dated the 25th of January 1777. I must express grave concern regarding the Pruitt matter. The men dispatched to investigate have not returned, nor has any communication from them been received. This marks the disappearance of an entire family of 7, followed by 3 militiamen sent to determine their fate. I have interviewed the traitor Duval again and found him reluctant to elaborate on his initial report. He exhibits signs of acute distress when pressed for details, particularly regarding what he observed in the root cellar of the homestead. I propose a larger expedition, properly armed, to determine what has occurred. While frontier disappearances are not uncommon, the circumstances, as described by Duval, suggest something beyond the usual dangers of Indian hostility or natural calamity. Furthermore, the proximity of the Pruitt claim to the cave systems known to exist in that region raises additional concerns, given the recent discoveries made by the geological expedition led by Dr. Play, Montrose last summer. There is no record in colonial archives of a response to Fontaine's letter. A military dispatch from the 8th of February 1777 says that a patrol of 6 men led by Lieutenant Burke looked into reports of problems near the western limestone formations and found no signs of recent human habitation or distress. The report's carefully neutral tone and lack of mention of the Pruitt family or homestead suggests that the purpose and findings of the second expedition were meant to be kept secret. It is clear from later records that the Pruitt homestead was gone by March 1777. A land survey done in April 1777 does not mention any buildings on the property. Instead, it calls it the unclaimed parcel formerly registered to Pruitt, now returned to territorial inventory. This is a very strange administrative action, since frontier land claims usually stayed in a family's name for at least 7 years, even if the family left or died, so that relatives or heirs could make claims. If it weren't for the fact that oral traditions are still strong in the area, the Pruitt family might have been completely erased from official records. As more white people moved to the Ozarks in the early 1800s, stories about the family that went missing became part of local folklore. These stories often included things that weren't in the incomplete official records, things that would later be found to be disturbing in hidden documents. Reverend Silas Whitman, who was a circuit preacher in the area from 1818 to 1832, wrote down one of these oral traditions. Whitman wrote down stories that early settlers told him in his personal papers, which are now kept at the Arkansas Historical Society. The old-timers speak of a family that came to the valley before the Revolution. They built their home over an old Indian burial site, despite warnings from a local trapper. The father discovered a cave entrance on their property and began to hear voices calling to him from below. The children were the first to change, becoming silent and strange, with eyes that reflected no light. Then the mother took to walking at night, speaking in tongues no Christian had heard before. The father held out longest, but in the end he too was taken by what lived beneath the earth. When a trader found the homestead, the family was gone, but something wearing their skins remained for a time. The militiamen who went to investigate never returned to the fort. A larger party was sent, and they found the house empty, but for strange markings carved everywhere. They burned the place to cleanse it, but it's said that the ground there remains cursed. Nothing will grow, and animals avoid it. Most disturbing is the claim that sometimes travelers report seeing children playing near the ruins in the twilight, children with eyes that reflect no light, who invite passers-by to come below and meet the family. Those who follow are never seen again. Whitman said that at first he thought these stories were just frontier superstitions, but he became worried when he saw that they were all the same in settlements that didn't seem to be connected to each other. He wrote, "I have heard basically the same story, with only small differences from settlers who live 50 miles apart and say they don't know each other. This suggests either an underlying factual basis or a remarkably widespread transmission of folklore in a region not known for easy communication between isolated communities." In 1841, St. Louis historian William Porter was the first scholar to try to look into the Pruitt incident in depth. He became interested when he saw letters between early territorial administrators that mentioned the Pruitt tragedy. Some of Porter's research notes are still in the Missouri Historical Society's collection. They show how he carefully worked to solve the mystery. I have found many references to the Pruitt incident in Claude Fontaine's letters, so I am trying to find out what happened. My first searches in the territorial archives didn't give me much information, and I noticed that some documents that should have been there weren't. This pattern of missing documents is interesting in and of itself. I have found descendants of Jean-Baptiste Duval who lived near Sweet. Genevieve and I hope to find out if any family papers might have more information about his encounter with the Pruitt homestead. I have also found church records from the time that might have information about the family before they went missing. Porter's later notes show that he was getting more and more frustrated with the official barriers to his research. I was told I couldn't look at the sealed part of the Fontaine correspondence without an explanation. Similarly, military records from Fort Charlesworth for the time in question are said to be lost. I find it hard to believe that records from different sources would all be unavailable at the same time unless someone tried to limit access. Even more worrying is how some officials have reacted when I've asked about these things. The territorial archivist turned pale when he heard the name and told me that no such records existed, even though I'd seen references in indexes. A retired military officer told me to leave sleeping dogs lie and look for another subject for historical research. Porter kept going despite these problems, using unofficial sources like local folklore, church records, and the private papers of families who lived on the frontier. He made a big discovery when he found a journal kept by Elizabeth Carver, the wife of a militia member stationed at Fort Charlesworth in 1777. She wrote in an entry dated February 20 of that year, "James has come back from the expedition to the Pruitt place, and he is very different. He won't talk about what they found there, but he wakes up screaming in the night. He has started looking at the floor of our cabin and listening at the walls. Yesterday I found him carving strange marks into the support beams, like those Dr. Hartford found on Jenkins's body when they brought him back. James says he doesn't remember doing this. Doctor, Hartford told me that Jenkins didn't die from any wound or illness he could identify, but rather as if life simply left his body over the course of several days. Before the end, Jenkins spoke repeatedly of those who wait below and the replacement that must occur. James won't talk about Jenkins or Scherer, and he changes the subject whenever they are brought up. This journal entry is the first record that at least one of the militiamen, Thomas Jenkins, came back from the first investigation, only to die in strange circumstances. It also introduces elements that would become recurring motifs in the Pruitt mystery, those strange markings, the references to those who wait below, and the concept of replacement. Porter's research notes say that he found and talked to relatives of James Harlow, the corporal in the militia who was listed as missing. Met today with Jacob Harlow, great-grandson of Corporal James Harlow. According to family lore, Harlow did not desert, but returned from his mission in a state of severe mental disturbance. He was confined to an outbuilding on the family farm after he attempted to lead his children to a cave he had discovered nearby, telling them that the family below wished to meet them. According to Jacob, his ancestor spent his final weeks carving symbols into the walls of his confinement and speaking in multiple voices, including those of children. Before his death, he reportedly told his wife that, "They look like us, they sound like us, but they are not us. They are patient, so patient. They have always been here, waiting beneath." Jacob claims the outbuilding was burned after Harlow's death. When I inquired whether any record of the symbols remained, he produced a small leather pouch containing a piece of wood, approximately 4 inches square, with markings carved into its surface. He permitted me to make a drawing but refused to part with the artifact, stating that family tradition held that the mark must stay with the blood or misfortune would follow. Porter's drawing of the wooden object shows a circle of stylized human figures connected by lines. These figures are arranged around what looks like a cave or tunnel entrance. Porter did not notice that these symbols were similar to prehistoric rock art found in some Ozark cave systems. He probably didn't know about these archaeological discoveries, but later researchers would. Porter found a sealed letter from Claude Fontaine to his boss, dated the 10th of March, 1777, in the personal collection of Fontaine's granddaughter. This letter was the most revealing document he found. "I write to you in strictest confidence regarding the matter of the Pruitt homestead and the subsequent investigations. I believe we have done what is necessary in destroying the dwelling and expunging the related documents from official records, but I remain deeply troubled by what we discovered." The testimony of Jenkins before his death, combined with the evidence found at the site, suggests something beyond ordinary human comprehension. The markings found throughout the dwelling match those discovered in the deeper chambers of the cave system behind the homestead, markings that Dr. Montrose's expedition documented last summer and attributed to an ancient indigenous civilization. Most disturbing were the items discovered in the root cellar, which appeared to have been deliberately constructed over a natural shaft leading to the cave system below. The cloth pouches containing human remains of varying antiquity suggest that whatever influence affected the Pruitt family has been present in that location for generations, perhaps centuries. Jenkins spoke of seeing the missing militia, Harlow and Scherer, in the caves below the homestead, but claimed they were no longer themselves. His description of their behavior and appearance before his escape matches what the traitor Duval reported about the Pruitt children: a perfect stillness, unnatural smiles, and eyes that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. I believe we have contained the immediate threat by sealing the most accessible cave entrances and removing all record of the Pruitt claim from official documents. However, I cannot shake the conviction that we have merely postponed, rather than prevented, a recurrence. The limestone formations in that region are riddled with passages, many too narrow for adult human entry, but perhaps navigable by children or smaller individuals. I recommend that no further settlement be permitted within 5 miles of the original Pruitt claim, under the pretext of uncertain land titles or military reservation if necessary. Furthermore, I suggest that any reports of unusual behavior or disappearances in the broader region be brought to our immediate attention, rather than processed through standard administrative channels. What we are dealing with, I fear, is not a singular tragedy. but the discovery of something that has existed alongside human settlement for untold generations, something that waits, watches, and occasionally reaches out to claim those who ventured too close to its domain. This letter, which talks about intentionally hiding information and sealing cave entrances, is the first written proof of an official cover-up of the Pruitt incident. It also brings up the idea that whatever happened to the family was linked to something old that happened before they got there. Porter's last journal entry, which was written on the 15th of October, 1841, shows how much his research changed him. I now understand why this matter has been systematically obscured. What occurred in that valley was not merely a tragedy, but something that challenges our understanding of human nature itself. The patterns I have discerned across decades of incidents in that region suggest an influence that persists beyond the original event, manifesting whenever human habitation encroaches upon certain underground spaces. I have decided to abandon this research and destroy my notes. The knowledge I have accumulated feels dangerous, not merely to my academic reputation, but to my fundamental well-being. Since examining the Harlow artifact, I have experienced increasing disturbances in my sleep and moments of dissociation during waking hours. I find myself drawn to the walls of my study with an inexplicable urge to recreate the symbols I have seen. Most troubling, I have begun to hear sounds emanating from beneath the floorboards of my home, sounds that my wife and servants cannot detect a rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat. But somehow, wrong the same sound described by Nathaniel Pruitt in his journal. I believe the authorities were correct in their decision to conceal these events. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. A fire at Porter's house the next week reportedly destroyed his research materials. He lived, but he never talked or wrote about the Pruitt family again. When coworkers asked him about it, he would reportedly get sick and refuse to talk about it. 3 years later, he died, having given up on his once promising academic career. For almost 80 years after Porter's investigation, the Pruitt incident was mostly forgotten outside of local stories. But starting in the middle of the 19th century, a pattern of similar events happening in the same area began to form. These events would eventually bring the original mystery back into the spotlight for scholars. Court records from 1847 mention a family called Collins who moved about 10 miles from the original Pruitt homestead. Within a few months, neighbors noticed strange things about the family's 4 kids, like how they would stay quiet for long periods of time, talk at the same time, and stand still in their yard for hours, staring at the ground. When local officials looked into it, they found the parents in a catatonic state and walls covered in markings that looked like the ones in the suppressed colonial reports. According to reports, the children told investigators that the people under the floor had told them to get ready for the replacement. All 6 family members were sent to an asylum in St. Louis, where they died within a year without ever giving a clear explanation of what happened. Dr. Frederick Schaefer, the doctor who treated the Collins family at the asylum, kept detailed notes on them. Some of these notes were found during a renovation of the old asylum building in 1962. The Collins children present a most unusual case of shared delusion or folie à famille. All 4, ranging in age from 6 to 13 years, maintain an identical narrative regarding entities they claim exist beneath their former home. They describe these beings as resembling humans, but possessing qualities that mark them as other: eyes that absorb rather than reflect light, movements too fluid to be natural, and voices that seem to bypass the ears and manifest directly in the mind. Most disturbing is their consistent claim that these entities are gradually replacing humans in the region, beginning with isolated families. When asked to elaborate on this process of replacement, the children become agitated and begin carving symbols into any available surface. Symbols that bear a striking resemblance to those documented in cases of religious mania, despite the children having no apparent exposure to such materials. The parents remain unresponsive to treatment, exhibiting a profound catatonia interrupted only by periods of glossolalia. During these episodes, they speak in what linguistic experts identify as a mixture of languages, including elements of Osage and other indigenous dialects interspersed with what appears to be a language unknown to current scholarship. Physical examination reveals unusual markings on all family members. Patterns of small, perfectly circular lesions, approximately 1/4 inch in diameter, arranged in geometric configurations on the upper back, shoulders, and base of the skull. These lesions do not appear to be the result of any known disease process or physical trauma. Dr. Schaefer's notes conclude with a disconcerting observation. I am compelled to contemplate whether the Collins family's condition may stem from environmental factors specific to their settlement location rather than solely psychological causes. The geographical proximity to the site of the notorious Pruitt incident of 1776, which I had previously regarded as frontier mythology, now appears potentially significant. I have corresponded with the Missouri Historical Society to request access to any documentation of the earlier case for comparative analysis. There is no record of a response to Schaefer's question, and his later medical publications don't mention the Collins case again. However, asylum records show that Dr. Schaefer took a long leave of absence after the last Collins family member died, saying it was for health reasons. He never went back to work and is said to have moved to Boston, where he gave up his psychiatric practice to focus on plant research. Records from 1879, 1904, and 1936 show similar cases in the same area, all with the same patterns of behavior changes, strange markings, and references to beings living underground. In every case, official investigations ended with either sending survivors to institutions or deciding that there had been a mass suicide or murder-suicide. Official records did not consider other possible explanations, even though investigators found inconsistencies that bothered them. The Whitaker family bought land about 15 miles from the original Pruitt homestead in 1879. There is a letter from the local pastor to his bishop in the church records from that time. The pastor was worried about the family. The Whitaker children have not attended Sunday school for 3 weeks. Upon visiting the family, I discovered a troubling transformation in their demeanor. These previously lively and inquisitive young people now sit in perfect stillness, speaking only when directly addressed, and then in a manner that seems rehearsed. Mrs. Whitaker appears heavily sedated, though she denies taking any medication. Mr. Whitaker was not present, reportedly engaged in improvements to the root cellar. Most disturbing was my discovery of unusual markings carved into the underside of their furniture and the back of religious paintings, symbols of a kind I have never encountered, certainly not Christian in nature. When I inquired about these markings, the eldest daughter, Mary, age 12, informed me that those below required them for the preparation. When pressed on what she meant, she smiled in a manner I can only describe as predatory. I fear some unwholesome influence has taken hold of this family and request guidance on how to proceed with pastoral care in this troubling situation. There is no record of a response from the bishop. According to local newspaper archives, the Whitaker family's house burned down 2 weeks after this letter was written. It is said that a lantern fell over during a family argument and caused the fire. It was said that the bodies of all the family members were found and buried in the church cemetery. However, records from the cemetery at the time do not show any Whitaker burials. The 1904 case is better documented because there was more news coverage of rural areas at the time. The Miller family, John, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 kids moved from Chicago to a rural property in the Ozarks to start a farm that would be able to support itself. 6 months after they moved in, neighbors who hadn't seen the family in over a week called the police. The Jefferson County Gazette reported on October 12, 1904, family tragedy in remote settlement. Sheriff's deputies made a grim discovery yesterday at the Miller homestead, where all 5 family members were found deceased under bizarre circumstances. According to Sheriff Wilson, the family appeared to have been dead for several days, though no signs of violence or struggle were evident. It's the strangest case I've encountered in 15 years of law enforcement, Wilson stated. The family was seated at their dining table as if taking a meal, but there was no food present. The positions appeared peaceful, with no indication of distress. Medical examiner Dr. James Harrison has ordered the bodies transported to St. Louis for further examination, as the cause of death could not be determined at the scene. Neighbors reported that the Miller family had become increasingly reclusive in recent months, with the children withdrawn from the local school in September. Of particular note were extensive modifications to the property discovered during the investigation, including an elaborately expanded root cellar with multiple chambers extending into the limestone formation behind the home. Deputies reported unusual markings throughout the dwelling, which Sheriff Wilson declined to describe in detail. A week later, a follow-up article said that the medical examiner had found that the cause of death was eating a poisonous fungus that was probably mistaken for edible mushrooms. This didn't explain why no trace of the fungus was found in the home, or why the family stayed at the table as the poison took effect. A personal letter from Deputy Samuel Jenkins to his brother that was found during a 1965 research project on early law enforcement in the Ozarks is even more revealing. I cannot shake the memory of what we found at the Miller place. The official report mentions the family seated at the table, but it doesn't capture the wrongness of the scene. They were too still, arranged too perfectly, and their expressions not peaceful as the sheriff claimed, but empty, as if something essential had been extracted from them. The markings we found weren't simple graffiti or religious symbols. They covered every surface: walls, ceilings, floors, even carved into the family's furniture and etched onto their silverware, intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The longer I studied them, the more I felt they were studying me in return. But it was the root cellar that truly disturbs my sleep. The official report mentions modifications, but doesn't explain that the family had excavated a passage extending at least 30 feet into the limestone bluff behind their home. At the terminus of this passage was a vertical shaft descending into darkness. We could not determine its depth, as drop torches were extinguished before reaching bottom. Near this shaft, we discovered a journal belonging to John Miller. The entries from their first months were ordinary accounts of farm establishment, but beginning in August, they took a troubling turn. Miller wrote of hearing sounds emanating from the bluff at night, voices without words, he called them. He described his children becoming fascinated with the limestone formation, spending hours pressing their ears to the rock face. The final entries document Miller's discovery of the cave entrance and his initial exploration. He described finding evidence of previous habitation of great antiquity and markings identical to those my children have begun drawing without ever having seen them. The last coherent entry, dated October 1st, reads, "They are not speaking to us, they are speaking through us. I fear we have become vessels for something that has waited in darkness for generations." The sheriff ordered the journal burned after reading it. He also commanded us never to speak of the shaft or the markings, instructing the medical examiner to find a plausible natural cause for the deaths. When I questioned this decision, he took me aside and told me that similar cases had occurred in the region before and that official policy was to prevent panic and preserve property values. I handed in my badge the following week. I cannot serve in an office that conceals truth, particularly when I suspect that concealment may enable future tragedies. I write this account so that some record of what really happened may survive. After resigning, Deputy Jenkins is said to have left Missouri and moved to Oklahoma. Later researchers tried to find him or his descendants, but they were not able to. The 1936 case is well documented because it involved a family named Larson who had just moved from Chicago to a rural property in the Ozarks. Edward Larson, the father, was a journalist who had come to the area to write a book about historical disappearances. Neighbors said that the family's behavior changed a lot about 2 months after they started making changes to their home, such as adding to the root cellar. The last police report said that Larson killed his wife and 2 kids before killing himself, but the officers who responded said there were things that didn't make sense to them. The family was found dead at their dining table, but there were no signs of injury. Researchers still can't get the autopsy results because the court ordered them to be sealed. The sheriff's deputy who first entered the house said, "They were sitting there like they were frozen in time, all of them staring at the same spot on the floor. Their faces didn't look right, like they were stretched somehow. And the markings all over the walls? I don't know what language that was, but it wasn't English. The root cellar door was open. None of us would go down there after what Jenkins saw." But Deputy Jenkins' findings were never officially recorded. The next week, he quit the sheriff's department and is said to have left the state. Researchers tried to find him in the 1,960 seconds, but were unsuccessful. The Larson case might have been forgotten like the others before it, if it weren't for an important discovery in 1967. When Helen Milner, an elderly librarian in Springfield, Missouri, died, her estate's executors found a sealed box among her things, with instructions to destroy it when she died. Milner's nephew, who was in charge of the estate, decided to look inside instead. He later said it was the greatest regret of my life. The box had what looked like Edward Larson's research materials, including long notes on the disappearance of the Pruitt family and other similar cases. It is still unclear how Milner got these things. Larson's journals from his time in the Ozarks, which recorded how his family slowly changed, were even more disturbing. These journals say that Larson found a network of limestone caves under his property that showed signs of activity from both the indigenous people and the colonial period. He found a metal box with papers inside that he thought belonged to Nathaniel Pruitt. The papers had detailed drawings of symbols and what looked like instructions for some kind of ritual. Larson's journal is the best first-hand account of how the replacement symptoms got worse over time. The 15th of March, 1936. We've been in the house for 2 weeks now, and I've set up my research office in the small bedroom at the back. Marion and the kids are settling in well, but they find the isolation hard after living in Chicago. I've started to organize my notes on disappearances in the area, focusing on the Pruitt case in particular. The similarities between incidents that happened decades apart are striking. Families living in isolated areas, changes in children's behavior, mentions of voices or entities below, and the recurring theme of replacement. March 30th, 1936. Today, I made an amazing discovery. While digging to make the root cellar bigger, I broke through into what looks like a natural cave system. The opening is small but easy to get through. Initial exploration shows a chamber about 15 feet wide with several smaller passages leading deeper. There are signs of previous human activity, like tool marks on the walls and what look like very old fire pits. The most interesting thing is the markings carved into the stone symbols that are similar to those described in accounts of the Pruitt incident. April 10th, 1936. I've gone about 50 yards into the cave system. The passages are complicated, with lots of branches and levels. I found a metal box from the colonial era, about 30 feet below the surface. It was badly corroded, but still intact. Inside were papers and a small leather-bound journal that I think belonged to Nathaniel Pruitt. The handwriting matches the sample I got from Virginia records. The journal has drawings of symbols that are the same as those carved into the cave walls, as well as text that looks like instructions of some kind, but I'm not sure what they mean. April 18th, 1936. Emily said she heard singing from the walls last night. When I asked her for more information, she said it was voices without words. This description is almost exactly the same as what other people have said in previous cases, even though I have never talked to the children about my research. Michael is very interested in the root cellar door and sits in front of it for hours. Marion thinks it's just childhood curiosity about my work there, but I am worried about how focused he is. April 25th, 1936. Marion discovered unusual markings on Emily's back this morning. Small circular lesions arranged in a geometric pattern. Emily claims no knowledge of how they appeared and reports no discomfort. The pattern matches a symbol from the cave walls. I have not told Marion of this correlation. Michael has begun drawing compulsively, always the same interconnected symbols identical to those in the Pruitt journal. When asked where he saw these designs, he replies only, "The people under the floor showed me." May 3rd, 1936. The children have become increasingly synchronized in their movements and speech, often completing each other's sentences or speaking in unison without apparent awareness of doing so. They spend hours in whispered conversation that ceases when adults approach. Marion reports hearing sounds from beneath the floor at night, a rhythmic pulsing she describes as like a heartbeat, but wrong somehow. I have not told her this precisely matches Nathaniel Pruitt's description from 1776. May 12th, 936. I have begun to hear the sounds as well. They are most pronounced near the cave entrance, but seem to permeate the entire house at night. The children now speak of those who wait below and the preparation that must occur. Marion has developed markings similar to Emily's. I have found myself carving symbols into the underside of furniture without conscious intention. The compulsion is difficult to resist. Marion no longer sleeps. She stands at the foot of our bed, watching me with an expression I cannot interpret. The children speak to me in voices that are not their own, explaining that what waits beneath has always been here, long before the first settlers, before the indigenous peoples. They have shown me the markings I must create for the replacement to occur. I understand now why the Pruitt incident was hidden, why all the others were obscured. Such knowledge is too dangerous. May 21st, 1936. They are in the house now. I see them moving behind my children's eyes. Marion no longer speaks, only smiles. The children tell me what waits beneath has been patient for centuries, gradually expanding its influence. They speak of other sites, other families, a slow and methodical process of replacement that has continued undetected. I have failed my family by bringing them here, by pursuing this research. I have delivered them to forces I cannot oppose. I hear them coming up the cellar stairs now. They wear familiar faces, but they are not my family anymore. God forgive me for what I must do. This last entry, which was written the day before the family was found dead, is the most detailed account of how the replacement went from the first signs to the final outcome. Local authorities quickly gave Larson's research materials and journals to federal officials. They were kept from the public, just like many other documents about these events. Milner's nephew, who had read the papers before giving them up, had a nervous breakdown a few months later. He kept talking about the replacement during his treatment and drew symbols on his walls that were said to be the same as those in Larson's journals. Some researchers thought that the unique geological features of the Ozark region might be linked to the fact that these events happened in the same area. The area is famous for its many limestone caves, some of which have signs of human activity that go back thousands of years. Indigenous oral traditions say that some caves are gateways or borders between worlds, where the line between realities gets thin. Archaeological finds show that some caves in the area were used for religious purposes by different native cultures long before Europeans came to live there. People have found rock art in hard-to-reach caves that shows humanoid figures with strange features and symbols that are like those seen in reports of the Pruitt incident and other similar cases. In 1923, anthropologist Margaret Welch studied the folk traditions of the Ozarks. She interviewed older people who told her stories about the family that went missing. Washington University, in Street. Louis has these recordings, but they weren't available to the public until 1967, when some of them were made available to qualified researchers. In one recording, 4-year-old Joseph Miller told what his grandfather had told him. They didn't just disappear, you know. They were there, and then they weren't. But they left something behind, something that wasn't them anymore, but wore their faces for a time. That's what the old folks said anyway. That's why they burned the place down. Fire cleanses. Another elderly resident, Martha Crowley, spoke of a journal kept by her great-grandmother, which contained a second-hand account of the incident. The kids were found first, all sitting at the table like they were waiting for dinner. But the men who found them said they had been sitting there for 3 days, not moving, not talking. Their mother and father were nowhere to be found. When they tried to get the kids to talk, they just smiled. They didn't eat or drink, and their eyes weren't right. These oral histories add an important detail that isn't mentioned in official records. The idea that the Pruitt children were found alive but changed in a big way. They weren't responsive, refused food and water, and somehow lived for days before being taken to a church in a nearby settlement. Different stories tell different things about what happened after they got to the church, but they all end with the building burning down for unknown reasons. Colonial records do not have any official information about this church fire. Anthropologist Catherine Reynolds put forward the most convincing theory about the Pruitt mystery in a controversial paper from 1965 that was not published. Reynolds posited that the Pruitt family unintentionally established their residence atop a location of ceremonial importance to indigenous cultures, potentially linked to altered states of consciousness or communal rituals. The combination of geological features, possible environmental pollutants like fungal spores that are common in cave systems, and the psychological stress of being alone on the frontier could explain the pattern of mental decline seen in these cases. Reynolds wrote, "Indigenous knowledge of these effects may be reflected in traditional warnings about certain cave systems being doorways to other worlds or realms of non-human entities." Symptoms described in many cases: auditory hallucinations, compulsive symbol creation, synchronized behavior, and the feeling of being influenced or possessed by outside entities were similar to what happens when you are exposed to certain environmental toxins, especially fungal spores that are known to have psychoactive properties. The limestone cave systems in the Ozarks are perfect for some types of fungi that make chemicals that are similar to ergot alkaloids, which have been linked to historical cases of mass psychosis. Reynolds' theory was especially convincing because she found a geological survey from 1947 that showed strange mineral deposits in cave systems close to where the Pruitt homestead was thought to be. These deposits had high levels of arsenic, mercury, and other elements that are known to cause neurological symptoms when people are exposed to them for a long time. She said, "The fact that similar symptoms have lasted for centuries suggests that there is a constant environmental factor rather than a pathogen that spreads, or a cultural phenomenon. The combination of psychoactive fungal compounds and low-level heavy metal exposure could produce the exact constellation of symptoms described in these cases," Reynolds concluded. "The progression from auditory hallucinations to visual phenomena, to behavioral changes, and ultimately to catatonia, or death, follows a predictable neurotoxicological pattern." Reynolds's request for money to do a full study of the area was turned down. Like many others before her, Reynolds gave up on her research after having scary dreams and feeling like someone was watching her. Her academic career suffered because she kept looking into the Pruitt mystery, and she eventually quit anthropology and moved to Arizona to become a high school teacher. The most recent case that fits the pattern set by the Pruitt case happened in 1952, when a family of 4 went missing from their newly bought farmhouse about 15 miles from the original Pruitt homestead. At the time, not many people were interested in the case because it was abandoned after it was found that the property was above an unstable cave system. No bodies were ever found, and the property has been empty ever since. The most interesting thing about this last case was the background of the family patriarch, Dr. Richard Conley. He was a geologist who specialized in karst formations and had come to the Ozarks to study the area's cave systems. Before he went missing, Conley wrote a number of academic papers about strange mineral formations found in limestone caves and how they might affect groundwater. In his last published paper, from January 1952, Conley said, "Certain cave systems in the western Ozark region exhibit mineral compositions unlike any documented elsewhere in North America. Of particular interest are deposits containing compounds that, when subjected to the specific temperature and humidity conditions common to these environments, may release airborne particulate with potential neurological effects." Historical accounts of unusual psychological phenomena associated with these cave systems may have a basis in these environmental exposures rather than in the supernatural explanations often attributed to them. 3 months after this article came out, Conley bought land near the original Pruitt homestead and moved his family there so he could do research on the ground. He didn't write any more academic papers. When the police looked into the family's disappearance in June 1952, they found the house empty but intact, with a meal set out on the table. This was a scene that was eerily similar to the first Pruitt incident. Finding Conley's field journal was even more troubling. It showed that he had explored a cave system that could be reached through the property's root cellar. The last few entries talk about how he found strange growth patterns in fungal formations close to mineral deposits and decided to collect samples for study. He said that after going on several trips into the caves with him, his kids had started to show more awareness of their senses. For example, they could find their way around perfectly in the dark and talk to each other without speaking. The last entry from the 3rd of June 1952 says, "They have always been here, not a contamination, but a communion."
The children understand already. Susan is beginning to accept.
I am the last to understand what we are becoming. The replacement is not an end, but a transformation. County records show that after this event, a historical preservation society bought a large piece of land that included this property and what is thought to be the site of the original Pruitt homestead. The stated goal was to protect the environment, but no building or research has been allowed in the area since. Journalists and researchers have always been turned away when they tried to get to these places. A local historian talked to the last known descendant of one of the 3 militiamen who went missing while looking into the original Pruitt homestead in 1959. The old woman told a family story that had been passed down through the generations. Her ancestor had not disappeared but had come back, changed, talking about the family beneath and the replacement that must occur. According to family lore, he was kept in an outbuilding on the family farm, where he carved symbols into the walls and spoke in voices that were not his own until he died 3 weeks later. They look like us, they sound like us, but they are not us, and they are patient, so patient. They have always been here, waiting beneath. The Pruitts were just the beginning, he is said to have told his wife before he died. This statement, which is the same in several independent accounts from different decades, suggests that there is a continuity of experience that goes beyond being explained as folklore or coincidence. It points to something that has been in that area for a long time, something that waits, watches, and sometimes reaches out to take those who get too close to its territory. In 1968, when workers were fixing up the county courthouse in Jasper County, Missouri, they found a sealed compartment in a wall that held a metal box. There were papers inside that dated back to the late 1700s. Including what looked like a partial official report about the Pruitt incident. A French colonial official wrote the report, which said that things found at the homestead didn't match up with the story of the disappearance. This document says that physical evidence showed that the family had been acting strangely in the weeks before the event. The markings had been carved into the walls of the cabin and were hidden behind furniture and decorations. Under the floorboards, investigators found small cloth bags with human teeth, hair, and bone fragments in them. Some of these items look like they had been there for decades before the Pruitt family moved in, which suggests that they had found them on the property. The description of the root cellar was the most troubling. The papers said that digging showed that the cellar had been built on purpose over what looked like the entrance to a natural limestone cave. There were markings on the stone walls of the cave that were similar to those found in the cabin, showing that people had lived there a long time ago. The report from the colonial official said that the Pruitt family hadn't disappeared, but had instead left the area after waking something up that had been sleeping under their house for a long time. In 1969, the federal government ordered that this document be moved to the Missouri Historical Society and kept from the public. The official reason given was concerns about preserving history, but researchers who wanted to see it were turned down without any further explanation. Robert Chambers, an anthropologist, led an archaeological dig in the area where the Pruitt homestead was thought to be in 1968. The expedition's field notes say they found the burned foundation of a big cabin and proof of a root cellar that had been filled with stones. After 3 members of the team reported having very bad mental health problems, including vivid nightmares and auditory hallucinations, the attempts to dig up the cellar were called off. Chambers's last report was very restrained, only saying that the site appears to have cultural significance beyond its colonial-era occupation, with evidence suggesting prior indigenous use of a complex of natural caves beneath the homestead location. Further investigation is not recommended due to structural instability. What Chambers didn't put in his official report but told a co-worker in a letter, which was later found among his personal effects after he died in 1976, was even more troubling. The dreams started after we found the entrance to the cave system. They were always the same. Children sitting around a table, silent, watching. Behind them, something moves in the darkness, something that has been waiting. The local workers refused to continue after Thomas found the markings. They match what was described in the 1777 report exactly, even though we hadn't told the team those details. How could they have known what to carve into the support beams? And the children's voices at night, calling from the darkness, calling our names. The excavation was officially stopped because of budget problems. The site was filled in again, and there was no marker to show how important it was in history. Chambers never went back to archaeology. Instead, he got a job teaching at a small college and stayed away from doing more research on colonial settlements in the Ozarks. Folklorist Ellen Rutledge started gathering stories from the descendants of the area's first settlers in 1973. Her research found a common theme in local legends: the Pruitt warning, a set of signs that are said to mean that whatever happened to the original family will happen again. These warnings included strange silence in the woods, kids talking to things they couldn't see, strange burn-like marks on the skin, and the need to make or copy certain symbols. She wrote down some oral traditions that said that taking certain steps early enough could stop the replacement. Never build a house with a root cellar near limestone formations. If children start talking in unison or show unusual interest in the ground, move right away. Burn any objects with the symbols. Never touch them directly. If family members get small circular marks on their skin, separation must be immediate and complete. These folk warnings, passed down through generations, suggest a cultural memory of actual events rather than purely imaginative supernatural tales. Rutledge's work is especially useful for keeping track of how regional folklore has changed over time in relation to the Pruitt case and others like it. The particularity of the delineated symptoms and their uniformity across various familial accounts and temporal contexts indicate a common experiential foundation. The lasting power of the Pruitt mystery comes not only from the horror of what happened to one family, but also from the idea that it is just one example of a bigger problem that is still happening, taking families over generations while staying just out of reach of formal investigation. The pattern of official suppression is a very important part of the mystery. There is a clear pattern of institutional resistance to any thorough investigation, from the burning of the original homestead to the sealing of documents, from the career consequences faced by those who sought the truth to the psychological toll reported by researchers. This pattern of suppression brings up some very troubling questions. If these cases were just frontier tragedies caused by being alone, mental illness, or the environment, why go to such great lengths to keep them from being remembered? What information was thought to be too dangerous to keep? And maybe the most troubling thing is that if the pattern is really over, why keep it a secret for so long? The truth about the Pruitt family is hidden in the thick forests of the Ozark Mountains, where mist clings to old trees like ghostly fingers. This truth has been systematically erased from history, but it still lives on in whispers, in bits of text, and in the strange fear that comes over people who look too deeply into this mystery. The land that the Pruitt family used to own has mostly stayed the same. Hikers and hunters stay away from the area because it is so quiet and they feel like they are being watched. Local guides won't take groups there because of dangerous sinkholes and cave systems that aren't stable. Maps of the area made by the government have strange, blank spots where detailed information about the land should be. And sometimes, according to people who still tell the stories, kids go missing in those woods. They come back days later, unharmed but quieter and somehow different. They talk about playing with other kids underground and adults with big smiles who taught them songs without words. They draw pictures on their bedroom walls and listen to the floors at night. It looks like the replacement is still going on, but it's taking a long time and only one person at a time. The door that the Pruitt family opened by mistake is still open, and what lies beneath the Ozark Hills is slowly coming into our world. Maybe the real horror of the Pruitt mystery is not what happened to one family in 1776, but what started with them, a process that is still going on in silence and darkness, under the weight of systematic suppression and institutional denial, and that may even now be coming to an end. The truth is still hidden in sealed papers, in caves that have fallen down, and in the minds of those who saw the pattern and chose to stay quiet instead of going crazy. But once patterns are set, they tend to stay that way, and some doors can't be closed again once they are opened. Something is waiting in the thick forests of the Ozark Mountains, where mist clings to old trees like ghostly fingers. Something that wears faces you know and talks in voices you know. Something that has been waiting for hundreds of years and is still hungry.